The title of our conference is The Continuing Quest for Insights into Jesus of Nazareth, His Words, His Wisdom, His World. As you know, our conference celebrates the memory of David Flusser, Robert Lindsay, and Shmuel Safrai. Tonight I've asked a very dear friend of Professor Flusser to come and share some memories and some appreciation of Professor Flusser. We're honored to have with us Dr. James H. Charlesworth. Dr. Charlesworth is the George L. Collard Professor of New Testament Language and Literature and Director of the Dead Sea Scrolls Project at Princeton Theological Seminary. Jim has authored and edited over 60 books and 600 articles. I know that many of you, like me, have in your library, for instance, the monumental 2-volume Old Testament pseudepigrapha, which he wrote and edited. His honors and awards are too numerous to mention. Tonight, he will reflect on his good friend, the late David Flusser. Would you welcome Professor James Charlesworth?
Let us now praise famous men, David Flusser. Born in 1917 in Vienna, received his PhD here in Jerusalem in 1957 and the Israel Prize in 1980. As you well know, the insight and the personality seldom resides in facts. It's often in the interpretation and appreciation of that. Tonight I will try to share with you 3 decades of having dialogues with David Flusser in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. I remember those days very well. He often spoke with his body. His eyes blazed with excitement. His lips often quivered with inability to control words that just seemed to be fumbling out like an avalanche. His hands gesticulated with emotions, and his finger often was thrust into his mouth when he thought about the Romans. That needs no interpretation, I guess. 3 decades and 3 points. What are the 3 most important things I would like to share with you from these decades of listening and sharing with David? The first one is focus. Now we all know the distinction between a good scholar and a bad scholar, ability to focus. When I think about focusing with David Flusser, Flusser saw Jesus, he was able to focus, and he wrote a biography. Now many of you say, well, so what? It was at a time when almost every Christian was influenced by Bultmann, and the claim by the Bultmann and the Bultmannian school was a biography of Jesus is simply impossible because those who wrote about him were not interested in anything biographical, and we have no other sources. We now have scanned everything basically in the Christian field, and if you look in the Jewish field, embarrassment, frustration. Jews were not including Jesus. Massive books on Second Temple Judaism did not mention one of the most significant figures that arose out of that period. In 1969, David Flusser wrote his book, Jesus. I'm happy to let you know that it's about to come out in another edition, and it will be published by Erdman's, and I had the honor, thanks to David Bibbin and others, to write the introduction. In 1969, notice what David Flusser said. Now remember the landscape, a barren landscape, that if you stood up and said, I think we can say something about Jesus, what he said, what he taught, and where he grew up, people would laugh at you. What did David Flusser say? It is possible to write the story of Jesus' life. That's an powerful statement. And you know what? Most leading scholars today agree with that. let's give David Flusser some credit. I chaired 2 major conferences in Jerusalem. The first one was Hillel and Jesus. It was several years ago. And I was told when you gather people together, the great scholars never mention the word Jesus. It's a little embarrassing. In the year 2000, I was asked to chair the only millennium celebration in this land. It was on Jesus and archaeology. And the Israel Museum and other places wanted to sponsor it. And I was very curious, what title are you interested in? Oh, whatever you want, but make sure you include Jesus. Something happened in less than a decade. So through the haze of history, Flusser viewed the footprints of the incredibly great Jew, Yeshua Bar Yosef. First is focus. The second one is balance. David Flusser knew you had to include everything. Most scholars include 1 or 2 things. He knew you needed to use the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures. You had to use the New Testament. You had to use the Old Testament Apocrypha, the Old Testament pseudepigrapha. You had to use Josephus, Philo. You had to use the inscriptions. You had to look everywhere. And you had to be very careful in using rabbinics. Now the example for number 2, that is balance. And my point here is very clear. I hope it's very clear. You include everything and give a balance. If you only see one thing, you don't need a balance. You're already on a balance. Let's take a look at Jesus and the Essenes. These Jews, there are more than one group of Essenes. So when I say these groups of Jews, I think one was called a sect, but that's getting too technical for now. Flusser rightly said, if you find Beni Or, Photos, sons of light, you most likely have either direct or indirect influence from the Essenes, because the only group of Jews that claimed they were the Beni Or, the sons of light, are the Essenes. I think he's right. To talk about Jesus and the Essenes may think we're looking at something new. I remember when I was lecturing in Australia and a person raised their hand and said, "This is exciting and new. You're almost right." Well, it was a person that had claimed Jesus was an Essene. There's nothing new about that. That has been said in the academy since the 1700s. That's a long time ago, before the inauguration of the United States. Scholars were saying Jesus was an Essene, or he spent time with the Essenes, and from that period to the present, it's mainly a preoccupation of some Christians. I call them authors, I don't call them scholars. David Flusser, I think, rightly saw there are lots of positive elements. When Flusser says, Jesus said, the sons of light are wiser in this generation, he's right. That's a positive statement about the Essenes. Now, other people make another mistake. They say Jesus is anti-Essene. Yadin, I think, fell into that category. Jesus is anti-Essene. Oh, we could write many books, and I've probably written too many about it, about how we could show that Jesus is anti-Essene. But I also have a balance. I say there's pro-Essene ideas in Jesus. For example, Jesus said, do you remember it? It's in Matthew. Which of you who has an animal and it falls into the pit on the Sabbath would leave it there? Well, most of you think, well, what's wrong with Jesus? Is he having a migraine? Is something going wrong? Is he out of touch with reality? Why would he ever ask which one of us who had an animal who fell in a pit on the Sabbath would leave it there? So now we enter his world. And you find in the Cairo-Damascus document, if you have an animal and it falls into the pit on the Shabbat, you must leave it there. Obviously, Jesus seems to know this. He's not having a migraine. You were. And Jesus seems to understand his time in a way that we better. So, you see, Jesus in many ways can be seen as anti-Essene. But Flusser was balanced. Jesus was neither an Essene nor anti-Essene. One can see pro and negative influences, but don't forget, Jesus was also close to the Pharisees. Breaking from the burgeoning belligerence of the maximalist and the minimalist, Flusser blended all Jewish sources with a delicate balance. I commend him to you. 3, Jesus genius. David Flusser stands basically alone in the history of Jews looking at Jesus. The Jewish view of Jesus is, come on, give me a break. No one is going to teach their followers to love their enemies. It's just stupid, it is inaccurate, and it will cause great harm. Montefiore, at the beginning of the last century, summarized the Jewish views, and he said basically what I just said. It is stupid to teach people to love their enemies. Then a little voice with a quivering hand out of Jerusalem begins to say, this was Jesus' genius. And he said, he doesn't stand unique like a lone wolf howling in the desert. He's more like a precious piece of water on a huge tsunami. He's riding the crest of the greatest thoughts of that period. And David Flusser would give names after name. And one of them, of course, is Antigonus of Soko. He says, do not be like slaves who work for their master to make money, but be like slaves who want to work. It was David Flusser's genius to say, we're getting a new insight into the concept of love. Avodah. You know the Hebrew word, it means work and service. You work because you love. Not because you want to earn money, but because you love. Flusser saw Jesus not as a lone wolf, as I've said, howling in the Arabah. He saw Jesus as riding the crest of a wave in early Jewish thought. He and I would sit and discuss, and he would say, Jim, do you want to divide the world into enemies and non-enemies? No! Then you're close to understanding what Jesus is all about. And then he said, have you seen enemies become friends? I remember how he asked that. Have you seen enemies become friends? I said, yes. He says, that's the power of love. Do you think barriers should be around love? I love myself. That's a pretty sick person. We have a word for that, narcissist. I will love my family. I'll love my little group. When you begin putting barriers around love, you're constricting love. To love those who are difficult to love allows love to reveal its power. To love those who are difficult to love allows love to reveal its power. Jesus' genius, according to Flusser, germinates afresh through Flusser's persuasive perspicacity. Conclusion, I was told make this short. Maybe you say, well, he did one thing right. Flusser put Jesus in focus. Flusser showed us how to have a balanced approach to early Judaism and how to include everything. Flusser, I think, perceptively saw that the wisdom of Jesus is seen best in his concept of love. Jesus told us and showed us how to love wisely. David Flusser was proud to be a Jew. I know a lot of people get very confused about that. They say, was he a Christian or was he a Jew? And I say, you know you're working with categories that have collapsed a long time ago. David Flusser was proud to be a Jew. And he was pleased to recognize Jesus as the Jew par excellence. What is Flusser's legacy? I think it is to see Jesus' genius and Jesus' love command within the developing grandeur of early Jewish theology.